Start cooking at 4 a.m., my mother-in-law ordered, handing me the guest list. And this time, make sure everything's perfect, my husband added. I just smiled and said, of course. But at 3 a.m., I was already at the airport. 30 hungry relatives showed up to an empty kitchen. Can you imagine abandoning your entire life, your family, and a massive Thanksgiving dinner, just hours before it's supposed to happen? That's exactly what I did, and the mix of terror and pure exhilaration as I walked onto that plane was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It was 3:01 a.m., and the gate agent's voice crackled through the airport speakers. Final boarding call for Flight 442 to Maui. My fingers trembled, clutching my boarding pass, already damp with sweat and tears. 40 minutes away, in our suburban house, 30 empty place settings mocked me from the dining room table I'd spent 3 hours arranging the night before. The turkey I was supposed to have started preparing an hour ago remained frozen solid in the refrigerator, just like my heart had been for the past 5 years. My phone buzzed with another text from Hudson. Hope you're up cooking, babe. Mom's already texting about timing. I switched it off, stepped onto the plane, and left behind more than just a Thanksgiving dinner. I was abandoning a life that had slowly suffocated me, one helpful suggestion and dismissive comment at a time. As the plane lifted into the dark sky, I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched the city lights fade below. Somewhere down there, Vivian would arrive at 2 p.m., expecting her perfect feast. And Hudson? He'd be confused, probably calling me selfish for the first time to my face, instead of behind my back to his mother. But I wouldn't be there to see the shock in their eyes. I wouldn't be there to apologize. For once in 5 years, I wouldn't be there at all. And that thought terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. Let's rewind 3 days. The click-clack of Vivian's heels on our hardwood floor always reminded me of a judge's gavel, sharp, decisive, final. She swept into our kitchen like she owned it, which, according to Hudson, she practically did since they'd helped us with the down payment. Isabella, darling, her voice held that particular tone she used when she was about to assign me a task disguised as a favor. We need to discuss Thanksgiving arrangements. I was elbow-deep in dishwater, cleaning up after the dinner I'd just served them. Hudson's favorite pot roast with all the sides his mother had taught me to make the right way during my first year of marriage. My hands were raw from the scalding water, but I'd learned not to wear rubber gloves around Vivian. She'd once commented they made me look unprofessional. Of course, I replied, forcing brightness into my voice. What can I do to help? Hudson looked up from his phone long enough to share a glance with his mother. I'd seen it thousands of times over the years, a silent communication that excluded me entirely, as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with adult conversations. Vivian reached into her designer purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The way she handled it with such ceremony made my stomach twist into knots. She placed it on the counter next to me, with the care of someone presenting evidence in court. The guest list for Thursday, she announced. I've invited a few more people this year. Cousin Cynthia is bringing her new boyfriend. Uncle Raymond is coming with his whole family, and the Sanders from the country club will be joining us as well. I dried my hands on a dish towel and picked up the paper. As I unfolded it, the names kept coming and coming. I counted once, then twice, certain I'd made a mistake. 30 people. The words came out as barely a whisper. 32, actually. Little Timmy Sanders counts as a half person since he's only 6. But you should still prepare for 30 full portions. Growing boy and all that. Vivian's laugh was like crystal breaking. I know it seems like a lot, but you've gotten so good at hosting these family events. Everyone always raves about your cooking. Hudson finally looked up from his phone, but only to nod in agreement. You've got this, babe. You always pull it off. I stared at the list, my eyes blurring slightly as I tried to process what they were asking. In previous years, we'd hosted maybe 15 people, and even that meant I'd started cooking 2 days in advance, barely slept, and spent the entire dinner running back and forth between the kitchen and dining room while everyone else relaxed. When did you invite all these people? I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. Over the past few weeks, Vivian said dismissively. Don't worry about the timing, dear. You'll manage just fine. You always do. But I haven't bought groceries for 30 people. I haven't planned a menu for I took care of the planning part. Vivian pulled out another piece of paper. This one covered in her precise handwriting. Here's the complete menu. I've upgraded a few things this year. The Sanders are used to a certain standard. You understand. I looked at the menu and felt the room start to spin slightly. Turkey with 3 different stuffings. Ham with pineapple glaze. 7 different side dishes. For desserts, including a homemade pie crust for the pumpkin pie, because store-bought just won't do. Homemade cranberry sauce. Fresh bread rolls. Vivian, this is a lot for one person to handle. She waved her hand as if I'd mentioned something trivial, like a minor inconvenience with the weather. Nonsense. You're perfectly capable. Besides, Hudson will be there to help. I looked at my husband, hoping to see some recognition in his eyes that what his mother was asking bordered on impossible. Instead, He was already back to scrolling through his phone. "I'll definitely help out," he said without looking up. "I can carve the turkey and open wine bottles." Carve the turkey. Open wine bottles. That was his idea of help for a meal that would require approximately 16 hours of active cooking time. "What time should I start cooking?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be unreasonable. Vivian checked her expensive watch. "Dinner should be served at 2 p.m. sharp. The Sanders prefer to eat early. I'd say you should start around 4 a.m. to be safe. Maybe 3:30 if you want everything to be perfect." 4 a.m. I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Start cooking at 4 a.m. in the morning," she said more firmly this time, handing me the guest list. "And make sure everything is perfect this time." Hudson looked up then, but only to add his own emphasis. "Yeah, and make sure everything is perfect this time." The stuffing was a little dry last year. The stuffing that I'd made while simultaneously managing 6 other dishes while he watched football in the living room. The stuffing that everyone else had complimented. The stuffing that his mother had specifically requested I make again this year. "Of course," I heard myself say. "Of course, I'll make sure everything's perfect." But as I stood there, holding that list of 32 names and a menu that would challenge a restaurant kitchen, something cold settled in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just the impossibility of the task they'd assigned me. It was the casual way they'd assigned it. As if my time, my effort, my sanity were commodities they could spend without consideration. Later that night, after Vivian had gone home and Hudson had fallen asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with a calculator, trying to figure out the logistics. The turkey alone would need to go in the oven at 6 a.m. to be ready by 2 p.m., but I'd need the oven space for other dishes. The math didn't work. The timing was impossible. I found myself staring at the guest list, really looking at it for the first time. 32 people. But my name wasn't on it. I was cooking for 32 people, and I wasn't even considered a guest at the dinner I was preparing. That's when I noticed something else. Hudson's cousin, Ruby, wasn't on the list. Ruby, who had been coming to family Thanksgiving for years. Ruby, who had recently gotten divorced and was having a hard time. I picked up my phone and called her. "Isabella, it's kind of late. Is everything okay? I was just wondering, are you coming to Thanksgiving this year?" There was a long pause. "Well, Vivian called last week. She said that since I'm single now and going through such a difficult time, maybe it would be better if I spent the holiday somewhere more appropriate for my situation. She suggested I might be more comfortable at a smaller gathering." My grip tightened on the phone. "She uninvited you?" She didn't put it that way, but yes, I guess she did. Ruby had been family for 8 years, but the moment her life became messy, the moment she might need support instead of being able to provide entertainment value, Vivian had cut her from the list. After I hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. The list of names blurred in front of me as tears I'd been holding back for hours finally came. But they weren't just tears of frustration about the impossible task ahead of me. They were tears of recognition, because I saw myself in Ruby's situation. I saw what happened when you stopped being useful to Vivian. When you stopped being the perfect daughter-in-law who could pull off impossible dinners and never complain. When you became more trouble than you were worth. I was one bad Thanksgiving away from being uninvited from my own life. Tuesday morning, the grocery store at 6 a.m. was a wasteland of fluorescent lights and empty aisles. I'd been there since opening, my cart overflowing with ingredients for a meal that seemed more impossible with each item. I added 3 turkeys, 2 hams, pounds upon pounds of vegetables that I'd need to prep, chop, and cook into submission. The checkout total made my hands shake as I swiped our credit card, knowing Hudson would see the charge later and probably comment about the expense. Mrs. Suzanne from next door was in line behind me with a single bag of coffee and some muffins. "Having a big dinner this year?" she asked, eyeing my overflowing cart with concern. "Thanksgiving for 32, I replied, trying to sound casual about it. Her eyes widened. 32? By yourself? "My husband will help," I said automatically, though the words tasted like lies. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see pity creeping into her expression. "Honey, that's not help. That's watching someone drown while standing on the dock." Her words followed me home and echoed in my head as I began the prep work. I laid out ingredients across every available counter space, transforming our kitchen into something that looked more like a commercial food preparation facility than a home. By noon, I'd been working for 6 hours straight and had barely made a dent in what needed to be done. My back ached, my feet throbbed, and I hadn't eaten anything except a handful of crackers. That's when Hudson wandered into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, coffee mug in hand. "Well, you're really going all out this year," he said, surveying the chaos. "Smells good already." I was elbow-deep in turkey stuffing, my hands coated with a mixture of breadcrumbs, celery, and rag. "Can you help me get this into the bird?" "I can't manage it alone." He glanced at his watch. "Actually, I promised the guys I'd meet them for a quick round of golf. Pre-holiday tradition, you know? But I'll be back in plenty of time to help with the heavy lifting tomorrow." I stared at him. "Golf. Today. Just 9 holes. Maybe 18 if we're making good time. You know how it is. He was already heading toward the door. You've got everything under control here anyway. You're like a machine when it comes to this stuff. Like a machine. The words hit me harder than they should have. Machines don't get tired. Machines don't need help. Machines don't have feelings that can be hurt by casual dismissal. He was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone with 32 people's worth of food and the growing realization that I was invisible in my own home. The afternoon dragged by in a blur of chopping, seasoning, and pre-cooking what could be prepared ahead of time. Every surface in the kitchen was covered with dishes in various stages of completion. The refrigerator was so packed, I had to play Tetris with containers just to fit everything in. Around 5 p.m., Vivian called. Just checking in on the preparations, dear. How are things coming along? I looked around the disaster zone that was my kitchen, at my hands that were raw and bleeding from constant washing and food prep, at the mountain of dishes that had already accumulated. Fine, I said. Everything's fine. Wonderful. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the Sanders boy has a severe nut allergy. You'll need to make sure none of the dishes contain any nuts or have been cross-contaminated. Life-threatening situation if there's any exposure. A nut allergy for a 6-year-old that she was mentioning now, the day before the dinner, after I'd already prepared 3 dishes that contained almonds or pecans. Which dishes exactly should I? Oh, I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're so good at managing these details. See you tomorrow, dear. She hung up before I could ask any of the dozen questions that immediately flooded my mind. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of 12 hours of nonstop work, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not break. That would come later. Just crack, like the first fissure in a dam that's been holding back too much pressure for too long. That night, Hudson came home smelling like beer and golf course grass. Cheerful from his day of freedom while I'd been trapped in preparation hell. How'd the cooking go, babe? Everything ready for tomorrow's marathon session. I was sitting at the kitchen table, finally allowing myself to rest for the first time since dawn. My entire body ached, and I hadn't had a real meal all day. There's a problem with the menu, I said quietly. 3 of the dishes have nuts, and apparently the Sanders boy has a severe allergy. Hudson shrugged. So, make different versions of those dishes. No big deal. No big deal. 3 completely different dishes, requiring entirely new ingredients and preparation time I didn't have, on top of everything else I was already attempting to accomplish. Hudson, I need help. Real help. Not just carving the turkey. I need you to cook some of these dishes. He looked genuinely surprised by the request. But you're so much better at cooking than I am. And Mom specifically requested your green bean casserole and your stuffing. People come expecting your food. Then maybe people can come expecting your food, too. I snapped, my exhaustion finally breaking through my carefully maintained politeness. The sharpness in my voice seemed to startle him. We'd been married for 5 years, and I'd never used that tone with him before. Boy, you're obviously stressed. Look, I'll definitely help tomorrow. I promise. But tonight, I'm pretty beat from golf and I've got that early meeting I need to be fresh for. What early meeting? Tomorrow is Thanksgiving. Conference call with the Singapore office, time zone thing, but it'll only be an hour, maybe 2. I'll be done way before people start arriving. Another thing he hadn't mentioned, another way I'd be handling the morning rush completely alone. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. When had he become someone who could watch me work myself to exhaustion and feel no obligation to help? When had I become someone whose struggles were so invisible that they didn't even register as real problems? I'm going to bed, I said finally. Good idea. Get some rest. Big day tomorrow. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I did the math in my head. If I got up at 3:30 a.m., I could have the turkeys in the oven by 4 o'clock. That would give me 10 hours to prepare 7 side dishes, make fresh bread rolls, prepare 4 desserts, and create nut-free alternatives for the 3 dishes that were now off limits. 10 hours for what should have been 20 hours of work. The math didn't work. The timeline was impossible. And yet, somehow I was expected to make it happen, because I always made it happen. That's when I realized the most devastating truth of all. I had trained them to treat me this way. Every time I'd pulled off an impossible dinner. Every time I'd smiled and said, of course, when asked to do the unreasonable. Every time I'd apologized for things that weren't my fault. I had taught them that my limits didn't matter. I had made myself indispensable and invisible at the same time. I set my alarm for 3:30 a.m. and closed my eyes, though sleep seemed as impossible as the task waiting for me in a few hours. Wednesday, 2:47 a.m. I woke up before my alarm, my body jolting awake from a dream where I was running through an endless kitchen while faceless people shouted orders at me. The house was completely dark and silent, except for Hudson's steady breathing beside me. For a moment, I lay there in the darkness, and a strange thought crossed my mind. Asterisk, what would happen if I just didn't get up? What if I stayed in bed and let the alarm ring? What if 32 people showed up to an empty table and had to figure out their own dinner for once? Asterisk, the thought was so foreign, so completely counter to everything I'd been conditioned to do, that it almost made me laugh. Almost. But then I imagined Vivian's face when she arrived to chaos instead of perfection. I imagined Hudson's confusion when he realized I wasn't going to fix everything like I always did. I imagined 32 people who had made no alternative plans, who had brought nothing to contribute, standing around looking at each other. And for the first time in years, I felt something other than dread about a family gathering. I felt curious. I slipped out of bed without waking Hudson and padded downstairs to the kitchen. In the early morning darkness, surrounded by the evidence of yesterday's prep work, I allowed myself to really think about the unthinkable. What if I left? Not forever, not dramatically. Just left. Got in my car and drove somewhere else. Let them handle one meal without me. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I'd never, in 31 years of life, simply not shown up to something I was expected to do. I'd never let anyone down. I'd never put my own needs before someone else's convenience. I made a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the guest list that still lay where Vivian had placed it 2 days ago. 32 names. 32 people who were expecting me to sacrifice my sleep, my health, my sanity to provide them with a perfect meal while they provided nothing in return except criticism if things weren't exactly right. I picked up my phone and, on impulse, opened a travel website. Just to look. Just to see what was possible. The first result made my breath catch. Asterisk, last-minute Thanksgiving getaway to Hawaii. Limited seats available. Depart early Thursday morning. Return Sunday. Asterisk, Hawaii. I'd always wanted to go to Hawaii, but Hudson preferred destinations with good golf courses and business networking opportunities. Hawaii is just beaches and tourist traps, he'd always said. What would we do there all day? I clicked on the listing before I could talk myself out of it. The flight departed at 4:15 a.m., almost exactly the time I was supposed to start cooking. The price was high, much higher than Hudson would ever approve of for a spontaneous vacation. But it was our money too. Our joint account that I'd contributed to just as much as he had, even though he made more, and somehow that gave him veto power over major purchases. I stared at the booking screen for a long time, my finger hovering over the select flight button. What kind of person abandons 32 people on Thanksgiving? But another voice in my head, quieter but somehow stronger, asked, what kind of person expects one individual to handle 32 people's dinner with no help? I thought about Ruby. Uninvited from a family she'd been part of for 8 years because her divorce made her inconvenient. I thought about Hudson dismissing my requests for help like they were unreasonable demands instead of desperate pleas. I thought about Vivian casually mentioning a life-threatening allergy the day before the dinner as if my ability to completely restructure the menu overnight was a given. I thought about who I used to be before I became the person who always said yes. Who always made it work. Who always apologized for not being perfect enough. Before I could change my mind, I clicked Select Flight. The next screen asked for passenger information. I typed in my name, my birth date, my information, just mine. A party of one. There was something powerful about seeing my name on that booking form all by itself. Isabella Foster. Not Hudson's wife. Not Vivian's daughter-in-law. Just me. I entered our credit card information and clicked Book Now. Before I could think too hard about what I was doing, the confirmation email arrived immediately. Asterisk flight 442 to Maui, departing 4:15 a.m., gate B12. Check-in recommended 2 hours prior, which meant I needed to leave for the airport at 1:30 a.m. Asterisk in 10 hours, I should be pulling the first turkey out of the oven. Instead, I'd be somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, watching the sunrise from 30,000 feet. The realization of what I'd just done hit me like a physical force. I was actually going to do this. I was going to disappear on Thanksgiving morning and let them figure out their own dinner. Part of me expected to feel guilt or panic or the urge to cancel the flight and get back to my preparations. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. I spent the rest of the early morning hours moving through the house like a ghost, packing a small suitcase with summer clothes I hadn't worn in months, swimsuits that had been buried in my drawer, sundresses that Hudson always said were too casual for the places we went together. As I packed, I found myself thinking about all the Thanksgivings I'd orchestrated over the years. All the hours of preparation, the stress, the exhaustion. All the times I'd eaten my own dinner cold because I'd been too busy serving everyone else. All the compliments that had gone to Vivian for hosting such lovely gatherings while I remained invisible in the kitchen. I was folding a yellow sundress when Hudson's phone rang on his nightstand. It was 3 a.m. Who called at 3 a.m. unless it was an emergency? I crept closer to listen. Hudson, it's your mother. I know it's early, but I couldn't sleep. I'm so worried about tomorrow. Even through the phone, I could hear the anxiety in Vivian's voice. Mom, what's wrong? Is everything okay? I just keep thinking about the Sanders boys' allergy. What if Isabella doesn't properly handle the cross-contamination issue? What if something happens to that child in our home? The liability alone, my hands clenched into fists. She was calling at 3 a.m. to worry about my competence, not about the impossible task she assigned me or whether I might need support. She'll handle it, Mom. She always does. Isabella's great with this stuff. But what if she's not careful enough? What if she's overwhelmed? 32 people is quite a lot, even for someone as capable as Isabella. Now she acknowledged it was a lot. Now, when it was too late to change anything, when I'd already spent 2 days in preparation hell. If you were so worried about the numbers, why didn't you mention that when you invited everyone? Hudson's voice carried an edge of irritation, but it was directed at his mother for waking him up, not for the impossible situation she'd created. Well, I suppose I could call a few people and uninvite them. At 3 a.m. the night before? Mom, just let Isabella handle it. She's probably already up cooking anyway. I looked toward the kitchen where I should indeed be cooking, where I should be starting the impossible marathon that would consume the next 12 hours of my life. Instead, I zipped my suitcase closed and carried it quietly downstairs. I left a note on the kitchen counter next to Vivian's guest list. I kept it simple. Hudson, something came up and I had to leave town. You'll need to handle Thanksgiving dinner. The groceries are in the fridge. Isabella. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I didn't offer suggestions for how to salvage the meal or provide detailed instructions. For once in my life, I simply stated the facts and left them to figure out the rest. As I loaded my suitcase into my car, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. I looked different somehow. Not just tired. I'd looked tired for years. I looked determined. The drive to the airport was surreal. The roads were empty, except for a few other early travelers and night shift workers heading home. I'd driven these same streets thousands of times, but never at this hour, never for this reason. Never with this sense of stepping completely outside my normal life. At the airport, checking in for the flight felt like crossing a threshold I couldn't uncross. The gate agent, a woman about my age with kind eyes, looked at my ticket. Oh, Hawaii. Nice Thanksgiving plan. Getting away from the family chaos. I almost laughed at how perfectly she'd summarized it. Something like that. Smart woman. I'm working today, but if I could afford to escape to Hawaii instead of dealing with my mother-in-law's commentary on my casserole, I'd do it in a heartbeat. As I waited for boarding, I turned my phone on airplane mode without checking for messages. I didn't want to see Hudson's confused text when he woke up and found my note. I didn't want to see Vivian's panic when she arrived to chaos instead of perfection. The gate agent's voice crackled through the speakers. Now boarding flight 442 to Maui. Welcome aboard. As I walked down the jetway, I realized this was the first time in 5 years that I was going somewhere Hudson hadn't approved of. Somewhere Vivian hadn't vetted. Somewhere I'd chosen entirely for myself. The flight attendant welcomed me aboard with a smile that seemed to recognize something in my face, the look of someone stepping into freedom. As I settled into my window seat and watched the ground crew prepare for departure, I thought about what was happening back at home. Hudson would be waking up in a few hours to find an empty kitchen and a note that would change everything. 32 people would be arriving in 10 hours expecting a feast, and there would be no one there to provide it. For the first time in my adult life, their problem was not my problem to solve. The plane pushed back from the gate just as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. As we lifted into the sky, I pressed my face to the window and watched my old life disappear below the clouds. Thursday, 7:23 a.m. Hudson's perspective. Hudson Foster woke up to his alarm with the lazy contentment of someone who had no idea his world was about to implode. He rolled over, expecting to find Isabella's side of the bed empty as usual on Thanksgiving morning. She was always up before dawn, making magic happen in the kitchen. But something felt different. The house was too quiet. By 7 a.m. on Thanksgiving, the smell of roasting turkey usually filled every room, and the sound of Isabella's orchestrated chaos in the kitchen served as a comforting soundtrack to his slow morning routine. Instead, silence. He padded downstairs in his boxers, expecting to find his wife surrounded by controlled culinary mayhem, probably looking a bit frazzled, but handling everything with the competent efficiency that had attracted him to her in the first place. The kitchen was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of activity. The ingredients from yesterday's prep work sat exactly where Isabella had left them. No turkey in the oven, no pots bubbling on the stove, no evidence that the Thanksgiving marathon had begun. On the counter, next to his mother's guest list, sat a folded piece of paper with his name on it in Isabella's handwriting. Even as he unfolded it, some part of his brain refused to accept what he was reading. Hudson, something came up and I had to leave town. You'll need to handle Thanksgiving dinner. The groceries are in the fridge. Isabella. He read it 3 times before the words began to make sense. She was gone. Isabella, his wife, who had never missed a family obligation, who had never failed to deliver a perfect meal, who had never left him to handle anything domestic, was gone. His first thought was that someone must have died. A family emergency that had required her immediate departure. He grabbed his phone and called her. Straight to voicemail. Bella, I found your note. What happened? Whose emergency? Call me back immediately. People are going to start arriving in 6 hours, and I need to know when you'll be back. He hung up and called again. Voicemail again. That's when panic began to set in. Not panic about the dinner that seemed too enormous to process yet. Panic about his wife, who always answered her phone, who never went anywhere without telling him exactly where she'd be and when she'd return. He called her sister, Carmen. Hudson, it's early. Is everything okay? Is Isabella with you? Did someone in your family? Is there an emergency? What? No. Everyone's fine. Why would Isabella be here? Isn't she cooking your Thanksgiving feast? The way Carmen said your Thanksgiving feast carried an edge he'd never noticed before, like she knew something about their holiday arrangements that she didn't approve of. She left a note saying she had to leave town. I thought maybe Isabella just left. Carmen's voice shifted from sleepy confusion to something that sounded almost like admiration. Good for her. Good for her, Carmen. 30 people are coming for dinner in 6 hours, and she's vanished. 30 people? Hudson, are you insane? You expected your wife to cook for 30 people by herself. The judgment in her voice stung. She's good at this stuff. She likes hosting. She likes hosting intimate dinners with friends, not feeding an army of your relatives who treat her like hired help. Hudson ended the call, disturbed by Carmen's reaction. Why was everyone acting like this was somehow his fault? He tried Isabella's phone again. Voicemail. 8:15 a.m. His conference call with Singapore started in 45 minutes. The call he couldn't miss. The one that could determine his promotion timeline for the next year. But 32 people were expecting dinner in less than 6 hours. He opened the refrigerator and stared at the contents. The raw turkeys looked back at him accusingly. He'd never cooked a turkey in his life. He'd never cooked anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. His phone rang. His mother. Good morning, darling. How are the preparations coming along? Is Isabella managing the timeline properly? Mom, we have a problem. What kind of problem? Did she burn something already? I told you we should have hired a caterer for a dinner this size. Isabella's gone. Silence. Then, gone where? I don't know. She left a note saying something came up and she had to leave town. She's not answering her phone. That's impossible. Isabella would never abandon a dinner party, especially not today. There must be some misunderstanding. Hudson looked at the note again, as if it might have changed. There's no misunderstanding. She's gone, and we have 32 people coming for dinner. The silence stretched so long that Hudson wondered if the call had dropped. Mother, this is a disaster. Her voice had gone cold and sharp. An absolute disaster. What kind of wife abandons her family on Thanksgiving? Something about the way she said it, the immediate assumption that Isabella was the villain in this scenario, made Hudson defensive in a way that surprised him. Maybe she had an emergency. Maybe something happened that she couldn't. What emergency requires someone to abandon 32 dinner guests without any note? What emergency prevents someone from answering their phone to explain the situation? Hudson didn't have an answer to that. We need to fix this immediately, Vivian continued, her voice taking on the command tone she used when managing family crises. Call every decent restaurant in town. See if any of them can prepare an emergency Thanksgiving dinner for 32 people. Hudson spent the next hour on the phone with restaurants, catering companies, and hotels. Every conversation went the same way. Laughter, followed by the information that their Thanksgiving dinners had been booked for months. Sir, said the manager of the Hilton, it's 9 a.m. on Thanksgiving. Even if we had availability, which we don't, there's no way to prepare a dinner for 32 people with 5 hours notice. By 10 a.m., Hudson had exhausted every professional option. His Singapore conference call had come and gone ignored. He'd probably damaged his relationship with his biggest client, but that seemed secondary to the immediate crisis. He called his mother back. Any luck with the restaurants? Nothing. Everyone's booked. What do we do? We cook it ourselves, obviously. Hudson looked at the raw turkeys again. Mom, I don't know how to cook a turkey. I don't know how to cook any of this. Then you learn. YouTube exists. How hard can it be? Vivian arrived with her sleeves rolled up and a grim expression that suggested she was preparing for battle. She surveyed the kitchen like a general assessing a battlefield where all the soldiers had deserted. This is worse than I thought, she announced. These turkeys should have been in the oven 4 hours ago. They'll never be ready in time. Hudson, who had spent the last hour watching YouTube videos about turkey preparation while growing increasingly panicked, looked up from his phone with desperate hope. Can we cook them faster somehow? Higher temperature. Hudson, darling, you cannot rush a 20-pound turkey. Physics doesn't bend to accommodate your wife's abandonment issues. They worked in tense silence for the next hour. Vivian barking instructions while Hudson fumbled through tasks that Isabella had always made look effortless. The stuffing ingredients sat in bowls, looking like components for a science experiment neither of them understood. The green bean casserole recipe might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Where's the stand mixer? Vivian demanded, rifling through cabinets. I don't know. Isabella always handles the kitchen stuff. Well, Isabella isn't here, is she? At noon, Hudson's phone started ringing with calls from relatives asking about arrival times and dietary restrictions. Each conversation became more uncomfortable than the last. Hey, Hudson, it's Uncle Raymond. Should I bring something? I know Vivian said everything was covered, but the wife made extra stuffing just in case. Actually, Uncle Raymond, maybe you should bring the stuffing. And maybe anything else your wife might have made, as backup. Backup? Is everything okay? Hudson looked at his mother, who was attempting to wrestle a raw turkey into a roasting pan while cursing under her breath. Just bring whatever you have. By 12:30, word had spread through the family network that something was wrong with dinner preparations. Hudson's phone buzzed constantly with confused relatives offering to help, asking questions, or trying to figure out if they should make alternative plans. The kitchen had descended into chaos. Vivian had managed to get one turkey into the oven, but it was clear to both of them that it wouldn't be ready until evening. The side dishes remained untouched. The elegant timeline Isabella always maintained had collapsed into panic and improvisation. This is humiliating, Vivian said, flour in her hair and defeat in her voice. Absolutely humiliating. The Sanders are going to think we're incompetent. Maybe we should just cancel, Hudson suggested weakly. Cancel? We cannot cancel Thanksgiving dinner at 1 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day. Do you have any idea what people will think? But Hudson was beginning to realize that what people thought was the least of his problems. The doorbell rang like a death knell. Hudson opened the door to find Cousin Cynthia and her new boyfriend standing on the porch with a bottle of wine and expectant smiles. Something smells interesting, Cynthia said, sniffing the air with obvious confusion. Instead of the rich aromas of a Thanksgiving feast, the house smelled like raw onions and panic sweat. We're running a little behind schedule, Hudson said, his voice strained with false cheerfulness. More cars pulled into the driveway. Uncle Raymond with his arms full of backup dishes, the Sanders with their 6-year-old son, and obvious expectations of the high-class dinner Vivian had promised them. Cousin after cousin, friend after friend, all arriving to find Hudson standing in the doorway, looking like he was greeting mourners at a funeral. Where's Isabella? Aunt Margaret asked, looking around for the hostess who usually greeted everyone with genuine warmth and the promise of an amazing meal. Had to step out. Emergency. The living room filled with increasingly confused relatives. Conversations grew stilted as people realized something was seriously wrong. The dining room table, set with Isabella's careful place settings from 2 days ago, stood ready for a feast that didn't exist. Vivian emerged from the kitchen looking like she'd been through a war. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her clothes stained with various food substances, and her usual composure had cracked to reveal something close to panic. Everyone, please be patient. We've had some unexpected challenges with the meal preparation. Mr. Sanders, a man accustomed to country club service and fine dining, looked at his watch pointedly. We were told dinner would be served at 2 p.m. It's nearly that time now. Yes, well, there have been some complications. What kind of complications? The question came from Hudson's cousin, Julie, who had driven 3 hours with her family and was beginning to look annoyed. Hudson and Vivian exchanged glances. Neither of them wanted to be the one to explain that the woman they'd all taken for granted had simply vanished, leaving them helpless. Isabella had to leave town suddenly, Hudson said finally. Family emergency. The room fell silent as 32 people processed this information. She left today? This from Ruby's sister, who, unlike Ruby, had made the guest list. What kind of emergency happens at 4 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning? Hudson didn't have an answer. Uncle Raymond cleared his throat. Well, what's the plan for dinner then? All eyes turned to Hudson and Vivian. 32 people who had made no backup plans, brought no substantial food contributions, and arranged their entire day around a meal that had been promised to them. We're working on it, Vivian said weakly. Little Timmy Sanders, the 6-year-old with the severe nut allergy, tugged on his mother's dress. Mommy, I'm hungry. When are we eating? His innocent questions seemed to break whatever spell had been keeping the room politely quiet. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. Maybe we should order pizza. Pizza places aren't open on Thanksgiving. What about Chinese food? With a 6-year-old who has food allergies? This is insane. We should have been told earlier. Where exactly did Isabella go? How long have you known she wasn't going to be here? Hudson felt the walls closing in around him. 32 pairs of eyes, all looking to him for answers he didn't have, solutions he couldn't provide. That's when his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Isabella's number. The entire room seemed to sense his reaction as he opened the message. Everyone fell silent, waiting to hear what his missing wife had to say. The text contained a single photo. Isabella, wearing a yellow sundress he'd never seen before, sitting at a beachside restaurant with a tropical drink in her hand. Her hair was loose and flowing in the ocean breeze. Her face was turned toward the camera with an expression of pure, radiant peace. Below the photo, a simple message: Thanksgiving dinner in paradise. Tell Vivian the turkey is her problem now. Hudson stared at the phone, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. His wife, his reliable, predictable, always accommodating wife, was in Hawaii. She wasn't handling a family emergency. She wasn't planning to return in time to save dinner. She had planned this. She had chosen this. She had abandoned 32 people on Thanksgiving. And from the look on her face in that photo, she had absolutely no regrets about it. Hudson. His mother's voice seemed to come from very far away. What does she say? He looked up at 32 expectant faces. His mother, who had created this impossible situation. His relatives, who had never once offered to help with the massive productions Isabella orchestrated for them. The Sanders, who were already looking around the room with barely concealed disdain. All of them waiting for him to fix what Isabella had broken by refusing to be broken anymore. She says, Hudson's voice cracked. She says the turkey is our problem now. The room erupted. Isabella's perspective, Maui, 2 p.m. Hawaiian time. The Mai Tai was stronger than I'd expected. But then again, I'd expected nothing about this day to go according to anyone's plan. I sat at the open-air restaurant overlooking Wailea Beach, my yellow sundress catching the trade winds, and watched the sun paint diamonds across the Pacific. It was exactly 2 p.m. Hawaiian time, which meant it was 7 p.m. back home. Right now, 32 people should be sitting down to a perfect Thanksgiving feast in my dining room. Instead, I was having coconut shrimp and watching sea turtles surface in the crystal clear water. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I turned it back on an hour ago. 17 missed calls from Hudson. 8 from Vivian. Text messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. All suddenly very concerned about my well-being. I scrolled through them with detached curiosity, like reading about someone else's life. Asterisk Hudson, where are you? This isn't funny anymore. Asterisk Hudson, call me immediately. We need to talk about this. Asterisk Hudson, people are asking questions I can't answer. Asterisk Vivian, Isabella, whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Come home and fix this. Asterisk Vivian, this is beyond selfish. You're embarrassing the entire family. Asterisk cousin Cynthia, Hudson says you had a family emergency. Is everything okay? Asterisk Aunt Margaret, honey, we're worried about you. Please call someone and let us know you're safe. Asterisk, I almost laughed at that last one. They were worried about me now? After 5 years of watching me work myself into exhaustion for their benefit, now they were concerned about my safety. I took another sip of my Mai Tai and opened my camera app. The sunset behind me was turning the sky into shades of orange and pink that looked too beautiful to be real. I took a selfie, making sure to capture both my genuinely happy expression and the paradise backdrop. Then I sent it to Hudson with a message I'd been composing in my head for the past 8 hours. Thanksgiving dinner in paradise. Tell Vivian the turkey is her problem now. The response came within seconds. My phone rang immediately. I let it go to voicemail. Then I turned the phone off completely and ordered another Mai Tai. By 8 p.m., the Great Thanksgiving disaster had reached legendary status in the family. Half the relatives had left to find restaurants that might still be serving food. The other half had gathered in the kitchen, attempting to salvage something resembling a meal from the chaos Hudson and Vivian had created. Uncle Raymond had taken charge of the turkey situation, declaring that they could cut the birds up and cook the pieces separately to speed up the process. Cousin Julie was attempting to make mashed potatoes from scratch while consulting YouTube tutorials. The Sanders family had left entirely, citing concerns about food safety and their son's allergies. Hudson sat at the kitchen table, staring at Isabella's text message for the 100th time. Each viewing made the reality more surreal and more devastating. She wasn't coming back. She hadn't been kidnapped or hospitalized or forced to handle someone else's emergency. She had made a choice to leave them all behind, and she was clearly enjoying every moment of it. This is what happens when you spoil someone too much. Vivian announced to the room as she attempted to salvage the green bean casserole. Give them too much freedom, and they think they can just abandon their responsibilities whenever they feel like it. But even as she said it, her voice lacked its usual conviction. Because somewhere in the chaos of the day, the impossible nature of what they'd expected Isabella to accomplish had become visible. It had taken 6 adults 4 hours just to get the turkeys in the oven and start 3 side dishes. What Isabella had been doing alone year after year was starting to look less like wifely duty and more like a minor miracle. Maybe we should have helped her more, said Uncle Raymond quietly, as he struggled to figure out how to properly season the turkey pieces. Help her? Vivian's voice was sharp. She never asked for help. She always insisted on doing everything herself. Hudson looked up from his phone. She asked me for help 2 days ago. I told her I was too tired from golf. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of boiling water and the timer ticking down on the oven. She asked for help on Tuesday, Hudson continued, his voice growing stronger as the memory became clearer. She told me she needed real help, not just carving the turkey. And I told her she was better at cooking than I was. He could see the scene now with painful clarity. Isabella's exhausted face, her raw hands from hours of food prep, her desperate request for actual assistance, and his casual dismissal of her needs because helping would have been inconvenient for him. "She's been asking for help for years," said Carmen's voice from the doorway. Hudson looked up to see his sister-in-law standing there with a container of food and an expression of barely contained anger. "Carmen, what are you doing here?" "I brought sweet potato casserole, since I figured you might need actual food." She set the container on the counter with more force than necessary. "I also came to tell you what I should have told you years ago." She looked around the room at the assembled relatives, all of whom had stopped their cooking attempts to listen. "Isabella didn't abandon you," Carmen said, her voice cutting through the kitchen noise. You abandoned her. All of you. For 5 years, you've watched her work herself to death for your comfort. And not one of you ever thought to say, hey, maybe one person shouldn't be responsible for feeding 32 people alone. Now wait just a minute, Vivian started. But Carmen cut her off. No, you wait. Do you have any idea what Isabella's Thanksgiving preparation looked like? She started planning the menu 3 weeks in advance. She spent 2 days shopping for ingredients. She got up at 3:30 a.m. to start cooking, and she didn't sit down until after the dishes were done at 9 p.m. 17.5 hours of nonstop work while the rest of you watched football and complained if the stuffing was too dry. Hudson felt something cold settling in his stomach. She never said it was that much work. Of course she didn't say it, because every time she tried to express that she was overwhelmed, you told her she was so good at it and better at cooking than everyone else. You turned her competence into a prison. The kitchen was completely silent now. Even the timer seemed to have stopped ticking. And when she finally couldn't take it anymore and left, your first concern wasn't, is my wife okay? Or why was she so unhappy that she felt this was her only option? Your first concern was, who's going to cook the turkey? Hudson looked at the text message again. In the photo, Isabella looked happier than he'd seen her in years. Her smile was genuine, unforced, free of the careful politeness she wore around his family. When was the last time she'd smiled at him like that? When was the last time he'd done anything to make her smile like that? She's in Hawaii, he said quietly. Carmen nodded. Good for her. She's always wanted to go to Hawaii. She never told me that. She told you lots of things, Hudson. You just never listened. I woke up in my hotel room to the sound of waves and the warm Hawaiian breeze flowing through the open balcony doors. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, savoring the unfamiliar sensation of waking up naturally instead of to an alarm, of having nowhere I needed to be, and nothing I needed to accomplish for anyone else. It was 9:03 a.m. Back home, I would already be dealing with leftover turkey and the aftermath of hosting 32 people. I'd be loading the dishwasher for the 4th time, wrapping endless containers of food, and planning the elaborate leftover meals that would stretch Thanksgiving into the following week. Instead, I was going to order room service and spend the day on the beach. When I finally turned my phone back on, it had exploded with messages. But these weren't just from Hudson and Vivian anymore. They were from relatives I hadn't spoken to directly in years, from friends who had heard about the great Thanksgiving catastrophe through the family grapevine, from people who apparently had opinions about my decision to prioritize my own well-being. Most surprising were the messages of support. Carmen, I'm so proud of you. You should see the looks on their faces. Hudson's cousin, Ruby, I heard what you did. I wish I'd had your courage when Vivian uninvited me. My old college roommate Maya. Carmen told me about your Hawaii escape. OMG, enjoy every minute. But there were other messages too. Vivian, I hope you're satisfied. You've ruined Thanksgiving for 32 people and embarrassed your husband in front of his colleagues. Hudson's brother, Dennis. Real mature, Isabella. Way to destroy a family tradition over a temper tantrum. Some of Hudson's cousins, people I'd cooked for and cleaned up after for years, had apparently decided I was selfish and ungrateful. The criticism stung, but not as much as I'd expected it to. Because for every message calling me selfish, there was another from someone who understood exactly why I'd left. My phone rang. Hudson again. This time I answered. Isabella. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. Thank God. Are you okay? Are you safe? I'm fine, Hudson. I'm in Hawaii. Hawaii? What are you doing in Hawaii? I'm on vacation. Something I've wanted to do for years. But you can't just leave town without telling me. You can't just abandon Thanksgiving dinner. People were counting on you. I looked out at the ocean where a group of dolphins was playing in the surf. People were counting on me to do something impossible without any help. I decided not to do that anymore. It's not impossible. You've done it before. I've nearly killed myself doing it before. There's a difference. There was a long silence on the line. Look, whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Come home and we'll talk about getting you more help next year. More help? Like I was asking for a favor instead of basic human consideration. What kind of help, Hudson? I don't know. Maybe we could hire someone to serve the food so you don't have to run back and forth. What about cooking the food? Well, you're so much better at that than anyone else. And there was the fundamental misunderstanding that had defined our entire marriage. Hudson genuinely believed that my ability to handle impossible tasks meant I should handle them. Not that the tasks were unreasonable to begin with. Hudson, do you know how many hours I spent preparing for yesterday's dinner? I don't know. A lot. 37 hours over 3 days. I calculated it while I was sitting on the plane. Silence. And do you know how many hours you spent helping me? That's not fair. I was going to help with the serving and the cleanup. How many hours, Hudson? More silence. Maybe an hour total. Carving turkey and opening wine bottles. So, I was responsible for 36 hours of work, and you were responsible for 1 hour. But you enjoy cooking. You're good at it. I closed my eyes and tried to find the words to explain something that should have been obvious. Hudson, I do enjoy cooking. I enjoy cooking dinner for my family. I enjoy making special meals for holidays. What I don't enjoy is being solely responsible for feeding 32 people while everyone else watches football and critiques my effort. So, what do you want me to do? I can't just become a chef overnight. I want you to understand that what your mother asked me to do was unreasonable. I want you to understand that saying you're so good at it is not the same as appreciating the work I do. And I want you to understand that I'm a person with limits, not a machine that produces perfect dinners on demand. Another long silence. Are you coming home? I looked at my hotel room, at my suitcase full of clothes I'd never worn because Hudson thought they were too casual, at the paradise waiting for me just outside the door. I'm coming home Sunday. Good. We can, but things are going to be different, Hudson. Different how? I'm done being the only person responsible for your family's comfort. I'm done apologizing for not being perfect. And I'm done pretending that what happened yesterday was my fault instead of the inevitable result of years of taking me for granted. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, processing what I was saying. So, what does that mean? It means that next year, if your mother wants to invite 32 people for Thanksgiving, she can cook for 32 people, or she can hire a caterer, or she can accept that family gatherings don't have to be elaborate productions. But she cannot expect me to sacrifice my health and sanity for her social ambitions. She's going to hate that. Then she'll hate it. That's not my problem anymore. Isabella, you're being unreasonable. Family comes first. That's what marriage is about. I felt something snap inside me, clean and final. Whose family, Hudson? Because your family has made it very clear over the years that I'm not really part of it. I'm the help. I'm the person who makes things nice for everyone else. But I'm not actually considered when decisions are made. That's not true. Really? When your mother made the guest list, did she ask me if I could handle cooking for 32 people? When she decided to upgrade the menu, did she consider whether I had the time and energy for all those extra dishes? When she mentioned the nut allergy at the last minute, did she think about how that would affect my preparation? She probably assumed I would handle it because I always handle it, just like you assumed I would handle it. Neither of you considered whether it was fair to ask me to handle it. I could hear voices in the background, his family probably gathering for leftover turkey and post-mortem analysis of the great Thanksgiving disaster. I have to go, Hudson said finally. But we need to finish this conversation when you get home. Yes, we do. After I hung up, I sat on my balcony for a long time, thinking about the conversation and what it meant for my marriage. Hudson still didn't understand what he'd done wrong. He still thought this was about me being ungrateful rather than about years of systematic dismissal of my needs and feelings. But for the first time in our relationship, I had stated my boundaries clearly and without apology. I had said no to something that was unreasonable, and I had stuck to it even when it disappointed people. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. I ordered a tropical fruit plate from room service and spent the day reading a novel on the beach, something I hadn't done in years. Every few hours, I took a photo of my surroundings and posted it to social media with captions like, "Learning to put myself first," and "Paradise is a state of mind." I knew Hudson's family was probably seeing these posts. I knew they were probably analyzing every word for signs of mental breakdown or evidence of selfishness. I didn't care anymore. For 3 days, I was going to be exactly as selfish as they'd accused me of being. I was going to think only about my own comfort, my own desires, my own happiness. It was going to be the best vacation of my life. The flight back to reality was turbulent, both literally and metaphorically. As we descended through storm clouds toward the airport, I felt my phone buzzing back to life with messages I'd been ignoring for the past day. Asterisk Hudson, what time does your flight land? I'll pick you up. Asterisk Carmen, how is Paradise? Ready to come back and set some boundaries? Asterisk Vivian, we need to have a family meeting about your behavior. This cannot happen again. Asterisk that last message made me laugh out loud, earning a concerned look from the businessman in the seat next to me. Vivian wanted to have a family meeting about my behavior, as if I were a teenager who had missed curfew instead of a grown woman who had refused to be taken advantage of. The airport was crowded with post-holiday travelers. all of us looking slightly shell-shocked by the transition from vacation time back to real-world responsibilities. But as I walked through the terminal, I noticed something different about my own reflection in the shop windows. I stood straighter. My face looked relaxed in a way it hadn't in years. Hudson was waiting for me at baggage claim, looking like he hadn't slept well in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 34 years. "Hi," he said when he saw me approaching. "Hi." We stood there for a moment. Two people who had been married for 5 years, suddenly unsure how to interact with each other. "How was your trip?" he asked finally. It was exactly what I needed. He waited for me to elaborate, but I didn't. The old Isabella would have filled the awkward silence with apologies and explanations, reassuring him that everything was fine and normal could resume immediately. The new Isabella just collected her suitcase and walked toward the parking garage. The drive home was mostly silent, punctuated only by Hudson's occasional attempts at conversation that I answered briefly and without enthusiasm. I wasn't trying to be cold. I was just done performing emotional labor for his comfort. As we pulled into our driveway, Hudson finally asked the question that had obviously been eating at him. "So, what happens now?" I looked at our house, the house where I'd spent 5 years making myself smaller and smaller to accommodate everyone else's needs, and felt a strange mix of familiarity and detachment. "Now, we figure out if our marriage can survive me having boundaries." I was barely finished unpacking when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Vivian standing on our front porch with the posture of someone preparing for battle. I considered not answering, but that would only delay the inevitable conversation. "Vivian," I said as I opened the door. "How nice to see you." She pushed past me into the house without waiting for an invitation, her high heels clicking against the hardwood floor with their familiar sound of authority. "We need to talk," she announced, settling herself on our living room couch as if she were holding court. I figured we might. I sat across from her in the chair Hudson always said was too formal for everyday use, but had always been my favorite spot in the room. "What you did on Thursday was unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to have to explain your absence to 32 people?" "I imagine it was very difficult," I said calmly. She seemed taken aback by my tone, which was neither defensive nor apologetic. "Difficult? It was a disaster, Isabella. A complete disaster. The Sanders are telling everyone at the country club that we can't be trusted to host a proper dinner party. Cousin Cynthia's new boyfriend thinks our entire family is dysfunctional. Uncle Raymond spent 4 hours trying to cook turkeys he had no idea how to prepare. That sounds very stressful for everyone. I'm genuinely sorry that everyone had a stressful Thanksgiving. I'm sure it was very difficult to suddenly be responsible for tasks they'd never had to handle before." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Tasks they'd never had to handle before because you always insisted on doing everything yourself. And there was the fundamental rewrite of history that I'd been expecting. I insisted on doing everything myself? You never asked for help. You never indicated that you were overwhelmed. You just took control of every holiday gathering and then apparently resented us for letting you." I felt the familiar anger rising in my chest. But this time, I didn't push it down or try to manage it for her comfort. "Vivian, I asked for help dozens of times over the years. I asked Hudson to help with cooking. I suggested potluck-style gatherings where everyone contributed dishes. I mentioned that 32 people might be too many for one person to handle. I don't recall those conversations." "Of course you don't, because every time I suggested that the arrangements were becoming unmanageable, you told me I was so capable and such a wonderful hostess, and that you couldn't imagine anyone else handling things as well as I did." She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her mentally reviewing past conversations, possibly recognizing the truth in what I was saying. "Well," she said finally, "even if that's true, abandoning 32 people without notice is not the appropriate response. Adults communicate their needs clearly instead of throwing tantrums." "You're right," I said, and I saw a flicker of surprise across her face. "Adults do communicate their needs clearly, which is what I'm doing now." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm clearly communicating that I will not be cooking Thanksgiving dinner for 32 people ever again. I will not be solely responsible for any family gathering of more than 8 people, and I will not be treated like hired help who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve everyone else." Vivian's composure finally cracked. "You ungrateful little," careful, I interrupted, my voice still calm, but carrying an edge that made her stop mid-sentence. "You're about to say something that will permanently damage our relationship." We stared at each other across the living room, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't look away first. "Here's what's going to happen going forward," I continued. "If you want to host large family gatherings, you can cook for them yourself, or hire a caterer, or organize potluck-style meals where everyone contributes. What you cannot do is assign me the work while taking credit for the hospitality. Hudson will never agree to this. Then Hudson and I will have some decisions to make about our marriage." "You would divorce your husband over Thanksgiving dinner?" I considered the question seriously before answering. I would divorce my husband over being treated like my contributions don't matter, my time isn't valuable, and my well-being is.